They burst through the door, black coats, rifles raised, eyes scanning the shadows. Smoke curls through the air, pages of coded letters burning in a small iron stove. A chair is overturned. A typewriter sits silent. She's gone. A German officer kicks open the next door, shouting orders in panic. On the wall, a single note scrawled in lipstick, "Too late." The Gestapo had been chasing her for months. To them, she was die Unsichtbare, the invisible one, a whisper in every intercepted message, a ghost behind every act of sabotage. Entire convoys vanished because of her coded transmissions. Train lines were blown, secrets stolen, agents rescued, and yet not a single photograph of her existed. Who was this woman who made the Reich tremble? A spy so skilled she could change her name, her accent, even her face, moving through occupied France like a shadow in daylight. They said she was fluent in 4 languages, able to seduce, deceive, and disappear before dawn. Her code name was Sabine. For decades, her story was buried under classified files, erased by both the British and the Germans as if she had never existed. But history leaves traces, even in ashes, because somewhere between the lies and the silence lies the truth. This is the story the Nazis tried to erase, the story of the spy who fooled the Reich. History forgot her name, but the Reich never did. The story begins long before the war, in the quiet streets of Brussels, where a young woman named Claudine André lived a life that seemed destined for normalcy. Her father was a stern schoolteacher, her mother a pianist who filled their modest home with the sound of Chopin and rain. Claudine was bright, curious, and endlessly observant, the kind of girl who listened more than she spoke, who noticed the smallest details others missed. She loved languages, the delicate shape of words, how a sentence could shift meaning depending on who spoke it. By the time she turned 20, she was fluent in French, English, German, and Dutch, a gift that would later save her life. But in 1939, the music stopped. German forces swept through Belgium with ruthless precision. The once bustling city of Brussels fell silent under the echo of marching boots. Posters bearing Hitler's face replaced the laughter of cafes. Curfews, checkpoints, and disappearances became part of everyday life. Claudine watched from her apartment window as soldiers dragged families from their homes, her childhood friends among them. One morning she saw a Jewish boy clutching his violin as he was forced into a truck. She never saw him again. That was the moment something broke inside her. She realized silence was no longer safety. It was surrender. Through underground contacts, Claudine joined a small resistance cell distributing pamphlets and helping downed Allied pilots escape through France. She used her charm and her unassuming nature to pass through checkpoints unnoticed, her perfect German fooling even the officers she despised. But it wasn't enough. The resistance needed more: coordination, intelligence, organization. That's when a British agent, posing as a journalist, took notice of her. In late 1941, she was smuggled to London under the guise of a refugee. There, in a nondescript townhouse near Baker Street, she was introduced to the Special Operations Executive, the SOE, Churchill's secret army of spies and saboteurs. Her recruitment file described her simply: unmarried, intelligent, excellent linguist. Calm under pressure, training was brutal. Days began before dawn, with weapons drills and survival exercises. She learned to handle explosives, forge documents, and use invisible ink. Instructors dropped her into the wilderness with nothing but a compass and told her to find her way home. But where others cracked, Claudine thrived. She discovered an uncanny ability to vanish into character, one day a nurse, the next a merchant's wife. Her trainers called her the Ghost, because she could slip into a room unnoticed and leave no trace she'd ever been there. She also mastered the art of radio communication, tapping messages in Morse, transmitting under pressure while bombers roared overhead. One mistake, one misguided word could cost lives. Yet her transmissions were flawless. Her instructors said she had a calmness that unnerved even her superiors. But it wasn't just skill that made Claudine remarkable. It was her understanding of people. She studied her targets, mirrored their mannerisms, predicted their fears. The SOE psychologist wrote in her evaluation, "André possesses an intuitive grasp of manipulation. She can make a man believe he's leading her, while she's leading him to his own destruction." By early 1942, she was ready. The operation was simple in words, but deadly in execution. Parachute into occupied France, link with resistance networks, sabotage Nazi transport lines, and relay information back to London. As she prepared to board the plane, an officer handed her a new identity and whispered, "From this moment on, Claudine André no longer exists. You are Sabine." She smiled faintly, adjusting her scarf, her eyes steady on the storm ahead. The engines roared to life. In that instant, the girl who once played Chopin beneath the soft rain of Brussels disappeared, and the woman who would haunt the Reich was born. The night air over southern France was cold and sharp, the moon a thin sliver barely piercing the clouds. At 2:13 a.m. the hatch opened and Sabine leapt into darkness. The parachute unfurled above her, a silent bloom against the stars. Below, fields stretched out like a chessboard, each shadow a potential trap. She landed hard, rolled, and lay still for a moment listening. Only the wind. No voices, no dogs. She buried the chute beneath the soil, adjusted her pack, and vanished into the night. By dawn, she had already shed her identity. The uniformed courier who had boarded the plane from London was gone. In her place stood Marie Duval, a widowed schoolteacher from Lyon, mourning her husband lost at the front. She carried a forged work permit, a ration card, and a soft sadness in her eyes that made soldiers pity her rather than question her. Sabine's first mission was to rebuild a shattered resistance network. The Gestapo had already executed half the cell's leaders, leaving chaos in their wake. Working from a bakery in a small village, she used loaves of bread to conceal coded notes, and her flour deliveries became the perfect cover for transporting weapons. By day, she sold pastries to German officers. By night, she organized supply drops and briefed couriers on escape routes. Her calm was terrifying. Even when a truckload of Nazi soldiers arrived unexpectedly, she greeted them with a polite smile and offered them warm bread. One officer even tipped his hat, thanking her for her kindness. None of them knew that just below the counter sat a transmitter capable of reaching London. In early 1943, her network struck its first major blow, a coordinated sabotage of 2 rail lines feeding the German front. Sabine's coded message reached British command, and within 48 hours, Allied bombers hit the exact coordinates she'd transmitted. Hundreds of tons of ammunition were destroyed, paralyzing the Nazi supply chain for weeks. Her transmissions became the lifeline of the resistance, precise, rhythmic, and always on time. But the more success she had, the more dangerous her work became. German radio detection vans began sweeping the countryside, triangulating illegal signals. Every transmission risked discovery. She worked in bursts of 20 minutes or less, fingers flying over the Morse key, heart pounding in the darkness. Sometimes she'd hear faint footsteps outside, patrols searching for the invisible broadcaster who haunted their frequencies. Then came the betrayal. A courier she trusted, a quiet man named Luc, turned out to be a double agent. He fed her safe house locations to the Gestapo. One night in Lyon, she arrived at a rendezvous point to find the door ajar, the lights flickering. Inside, silence. On the floor, a cup of tea still warm. Then she saw it, the outline of boot prints in the spilled sugar. They had been there. She fled out the back, just as a truck screeched to a stop outside. Gunfire tore through the walls as she sprinted down the alley, her breath ragged, heart pounding in her ears. She spent 3 nights hiding in the sewers beneath the city. Rats stench hunger, but she survived. When she finally emerged, her eyes were hollow but resolute. She returned to work within days, using a new alias and a new transmitter. The network had to go on. Weeks later, London sent word, "Outstanding work. Continue operations. The enemy is restless." They didn't know how close she'd come to death. Then, in April 1943, everything changed. During a transmission from a farmhouse outside Dijon, Sabine noticed a brief echo on her frequency, a faint repetition of her own signal. She froze. Someone was listening. German intelligence, the Abwehr, had intercepted her code. She cut the signal instantly, dismantled the radio, and burned her notes. Outside, the night was deathly still. The wind carried distant sounds, dogs barking, engines starting, boots on gravel, her cover. The one she had built so carefully might already be blown. She gathered her papers, pressed her pistol to her chest for courage, and whispered to herself in French, "Ils ne m'auront pas. They will not have me." Then she disappeared once more into the shadows of occupied France, the ghost woman the Reich could never find. Now hunted more than ever. Paris, 1943. The city still glimmered with candlelight and whispers, but beneath its cobblestones ran a quiet current of fear. Posters lined every wall, warnings, arrests, rewards. In bold black letters, "Wanted, die Unsichtbare," the invisible one, a faceless woman who had humiliated the Reich. In a dimly lit office inside the Hotel Lutetia, now the Gestapo's Paris headquarters, Klaus Reinhardt stood over a map of France. Thin, sharp-featured, eyes like knives, Reinhardt had earned his reputation in Poland and the Netherlands, breaking resistance networks with surgical cruelty. He traced red pins marking sabotage sites, Dijon, Lyon, Toulouse. Every explosion, every intercepted transmission, they all pointed to her. "The woman!" he hissed to his men. "Find the woman!" And so began the largest manhunt in occupied France. For Claudine, Sabine, survival had become a nightly negotiation with fate. She no longer slept in beds, only barns, abandoned train cars, or bombed-out ruins. Every sound at night, a dog's bark, a car door, a creak in the rafters, sent her hand to the pistol beneath her pillow. The radio was her heartbeat. Each transmission a risk. The moment she pressed the key, she became a target. Her network was collapsing. The betrayal from Lyon had infected every corner of the resistance. Reinhardt's men posed as escaped Allied pilots, begging for help, planting listening devices, using captured agents as bait. Every meeting was a potential execution. One evening, she arrived at a farmhouse safe house outside Chartres. It was supposed to be secure, a known contact, loyal for months. But as she approached the door, she saw cigarette smoke curling from the window. Her contact didn't smoke. She backed away slowly, heart hammering. From inside came muffled voices, German, a trap. She vanished into the fields before the soldiers realized they'd been seen. For weeks, she moved like a phantom, changing names, accents, even postures. In Marseille, she posed as a German nurse, tending wounded soldiers. In Toulouse, she became a widow, collecting rations for her children. She forged papers by candlelight, her hands trembling not from fear but exhaustion. Every disguise felt thinner than the last. Then came the betrayal that nearly ended her. A courier named Emile, one of her most trusted operatives, broke under torture. Reinhardt promised him his life if he revealed Sabine's next transmission point. Emile gave them the address of a Parisian apartment, Claudine's last safe house. The raid came at dawn. Dozens of Gestapo officers flooded the building, tearing through walls, overturning furniture, shouting commands. But when Reinhardt kicked open the hidden room, he found only an empty chair, a smoldering ashtray, and a note pinned to the radio transmitter. Wrong frequency. That single phrase sent Reinhardt into a rage. But while he fumed, Claudine was already 3 streets away, disguised as a cleaning woman, pushing a cart past the soldiers searching for her. Still, she knew she couldn't run forever. Her network was shattered, her resources thin. So she did something no spy had ever dared. She went on the offensive. Using her transmitter from a new location, she began sending false coordinates to German intelligence. Entire divisions were redirected to phantom sabotage sites, convoys ambushed where no enemies waited, trains rerouted into ambushes orchestrated by the resistance. Reinhardt's reports began to unravel. The Reich was chasing ghosts, and every misstep made him more desperate. But with every lie she told, the danger grew. The Gestapo doubled its patrols, and Reinhardt's men scoured every village, interrogating anyone who spoke a word of German too fluently. The walls were closing in. One night, hidden in the attic of a farmhouse, Claudine tuned her radio and heard something that froze her blood, a broadcast from Berlin. A new order: capture the woman alive. They wanted to use her, not kill her. That meant her name, her face, her voice, everything she'd worked to erase, was now their obsession. She looked at her reflection in a cracked mirror. For a moment, she didn't recognize herself. Hair dyed dark, eyes hollowed by fear and sleeplessness. She whispered, "I am no one. I am everyone." Outside, thunder rolled, or maybe it was artillery in the distance. She dismantled the transmitter, packed her pistol, and vanished once again into the night. In the morning, Reinhardt stood before another map, fresh reports littering his desk. He didn't yet know that half his men had been sent on a wild chase into empty countryside. Sabine had struck again, and once more she had left no trace. The legend of the Invisible One was no longer a whisper. It was an echo, bouncing through every corridor of occupied Europe, and Klaus Reinhardt, the man who vowed to catch her, was slowly beginning to understand the truth. You can't capture a ghost. Bordeaux. Autumn of 1943. The air was thick with fog and the distant hum of engines. Somewhere in the countryside, a flickering radio signal pulsed through the static, faint, coded, and unmistakably hers. The Abwehr had been listening for weeks, triangulating her every move. This time, they believed they had her. At 03:47 a.m., black cars fanned out across the narrow roads leading to a small vineyard on the outskirts of the city. Inside the farmhouse, Sabine sat at her transmitter, tapping out a final message to London. Her face was calm, her heartbeat steady, even as she heard the faint growl of approaching engines. She didn't panic. She never did. She finished her message: Operation Echo compromised. Switching location. Long live France. Then she set the code book in the stove and struck a match. Flames devoured her identity page by page. The smell of burning ink filled the room. Outside, boots hit gravel. The Gestapo had arrived. Claudine's movements were precise, almost rehearsed. She removed her plain wool dress, replaced it with a crisp grey uniform jacket she'd stolen months earlier, pinned with an authentic-looking Reich insignia. Her forged papers, marked with the seal of the German Intelligence Bureau, were tucked neatly inside. She tied her hair tight beneath a military cap, darkened her brows, and took a breath. By the time the door crashed open, Sabine had become her own pursuer. "Guten Abend, Herren," she greeted in perfect Berlin-accented German, as if they had interrupted her. "What is the meaning of this intrusion?" The lead officer hesitated. He was young, clearly nervous. Behind him, soldiers filled the doorway, rifles ready. "Orders from Major Reinhardt," the man stammered. "There's been suspicion of unauthorized transmissions in this sector." Claudine's expression hardened into practiced irritation. "Do you mean my transmissions?" she demanded, slapping the papers into his chest. "Courier 5729, Berlin Intelligence. Do you realize what you've just disrupted?" The officer's eyes darted over the documents, flawless down to the signature. He swallowed hard. My apologies, Fräulein. We were not informed." "Of course you weren't," she snapped, cutting him off. "Because you're not cleared for this operation. Now tell me, how many men were assigned to this perimeter and under whose authorization?" By the time Reinhardt's men began answering her, Claudine was already learning everything she needed: where they'd traced her last signal, where they planned to search next, even the code name of the double agent feeding them information. Every word was ammunition. When they finally withdrew, red-faced and apologetic, she saluted curtly and shut the door behind them. Only then did she exhale, slow, controlled. The flames in the stove had died, leaving only ashes where her codes once were. She waited until the cars had faded into the distance before stepping into the fog, walking calmly toward the main road, blending into the darkness once again. But the night wasn't over. From a nearby barn came a faint rustle, a whisper of movement. It was Fox, her most trusted ally, crouched in the shadows, pistol drawn. His real name was Henri Marchand, a former journalist turned saboteur. He had been her contact in Bordeaux, the one who arranged safe houses and spread false rumors to throw Reinhardt off the trail. "They bought it," he whispered. "You should have seen their faces." Claudine managed a brief smile. "For now," she said softly. "But we won't have another chance like this. We need to vanish." They moved quickly through the fields, but before they reached the extraction point, headlights pierced the fog. A truck roared toward them. Claudine dove behind a stone wall, but Fox wasn't fast enough. Soldiers poured out, shouting, firing. The night erupted in chaos. She called his name, once, twice, but the gunfire drowned her out. By the time she reached him, he was bleeding out, a dark pool spreading beneath his coat. His final words were barely a whisper. "Finish it. For both of us." She pressed his hand to her chest, trembling for the first time in years. Then as the engines closed in, she ran, not for survival, but because she refused to give them his body and her capture in one night. When Reinhardt arrived hours later, the vineyard was silent. His men found the remnants of a radio, a burned codebook, and a body. Fox. But of Sabine there was nothing, no footprints. No tracks, no trace of her ever being there. The newspapers called it the Bordeaux vanishing. Reinhardt called it humiliation. London called it a miracle. But to Claudine André, the woman known as Sabine, it was something else entirely. It was the end of one life, and the beginning of her disappearance. From that night on, no one, not the Gestapo, not the SOE, not even her allies, ever truly saw her again. The spy who fooled the Reich had become what the world would remember her as forever. The woman who was never captured. The war ended with the world in ruins, cities reduced to rubble, nations divided and history rewritten by victors. In London, among the chaos of files being declassified and missions archived, one document stood out. Agent Sabine, status, presumed killed in action, 1944. That single line was all that remained of Claudine André in official records. No grave, no photograph, no closure. Her superiors in the Special Operations Executive mourned quietly, though none could confirm her death. "She was too clever to die like that," one officer remarked. Another simply sighed, "or too clever to be found." For years, her file gathered dust in the dim corridors of Whitehall, a mystery swallowed by bureaucracy. But not everyone accepted the story. In the ruins of Lyon, a resistance courier swore he'd seen her, a woman in a nurse's uniform with a scar on her wrist, helping evacuate children to Switzerland. A year later, a coded message intercepted in Geneva carried a signature only one person in British intelligence would recognize: S. The message read, "The fox runs free. The hunt continues." It was enough to send a shiver through those who remembered Bordeaux. By 1951, whispers of Sabine had taken on a life of their own. Some claimed she'd resurfaced in Buenos Aires under a false name, coordinating efforts to hunt former SS officers who'd fled Europe. Declassified MI6 documents decades later hinted at a female asset, formerly SOE, operating in South America under deep cover. No name was given, but the tradecraft, the careful forgeries, the radio signatures, the methodical false trails, all matched one person, and yet there were contradictions. One report placed her in Lisbon, working at a Red Cross office. Another in the French Alps, where a nun fitting her description took vows at a secluded convent. Every version of her story ended the same way, with her vanishing just as suddenly as she appeared. For historians, she became an unsolved riddle. For those who'd known her, she remained a ghost, a flicker of memory, a voice over the radio that had once promised freedom. But for the pilots she guided through occupied France, the families she smuggled out of the Gestapo's reach, and the agents who survived because of her, Claudine André was no myth. She was salvation made flesh. They remembered her not for the missions or the medals, but for the way she faced danger, calm, unflinching, always one step ahead of the Reich that tried to catch her. In the decades that followed, her legend outgrew the facts. To some, she was a phantom of the resistance. To others, an intelligence operative who had simply chosen a new war in the shadows, and perhaps that was exactly how Claudine wanted it. Her enemies had called her die Unsichtbare, the invisible one. In the end, she lived up to the name more completely than even they could imagine, somewhere buried in a forgotten archive. There is a blank folder marked only with a single code name, Sabine, the rest erased, redacted, untold, but among the fading veterans and the children of those she saved, her name still passes in quiet reverence. Not the spy who fooled the Reich, not the ghost they could never catch, simply Claudine André, the woman who fought a war not for glory or revenge, but for freedom, and then vanished into it. In 2020, an aging historian named Dr. Amelia Cross opened a dusty attic in North London, the kind of place history tends to hide its secrets. She was cataloguing the possessions of a retired diplomat when she discovered a false floorboard beneath a cracked trunk. Inside, wrapped in fading linen, lay a small leather-bound notebook. Its cover was worn smooth, its pages yellowed, but the handwriting within, elegant, deliberate, unmistakably French, carried the name that had haunted historians for decades, Claudine André. For months, experts worked to decode it. The entries were written in a blend of French, German, and cipher, the same method once used by the SOE. Inside were names of resistance fighters, safe-house operators, and children smuggled to safety. And scattered among them, brief reflections, glimpses into the heart of a woman the world had mythologized but never truly known. One line stood out above all the rest. They hunted my face, but never my faith. It was a confession, a quiet defiance against an empire that had tried to erase her. But more than that, it was a final statement of identity. Claudine André had not disappeared to escape the war. She had vanished to protect those who had survived it. Further research confirmed what many had only speculated. Her sabotage missions in France had directly disrupted German supply lines during the Allied advance. Intelligence logs connected her radio intercepts to key operations leading up to D-Day. Her actions had not merely aided the resistance, they had shaped the outcome of the war itself. Yet there was no record of her ever accepting a medal, no ceremony, no photograph. She had slipped away, leaving behind nothing but coded signals and the ripples of her defiance. When interviewed, the few remaining witnesses described her not as a soldier, but as something quieter, a presence. She made you believe the impossible could be done, one said, and then she'd do it. As historians pieced together her life, a portrait emerged, not of a ghost, but of a woman who weaponized intelligence, language, and faith in a time when both were under siege. She had deceived one of the most powerful regimes in history, not through violence, but through sheer will, the kind of courage that leaves no monuments, only stories whispered in gratitude. In the end, Claudine André was never captured because she understood what every true spy knows. Survival isn't about vanishing from sight, it's about vanishing into purpose. Her diary rests now in the Imperial War Museum, under a single inscription. The most dangerous weapon in war isn't the gun, it's the human will to resist. And with that, the ghost woman of the Reich finally found her voice, not through the battles she fought, but through the truth she refused to let die.